Since the start of the Russia probe, there have been many parallels drawn between Donald Trump's situation and Watergate.
The banking and financial crime sounds like the parallel to Watergate.
It sounds like a direct hush money. It sounds like Watergate.
Two different stories about this Trump Tower meeting. And what it does is reminds me of Watergate.
We have to go to Watergate in order to make sense of what's happening tonight.
There are many parallels to Watergate. We've explored them on this show as well. But there is a parallel that's also been overlooked, and that's how Republicans in these eras have responded. My next guest, Michael Conway, was counsel to the House Judiciary Committee during Nixon's impeachment, and he actually says it's no surprise Republicans still are in line with Trump right now. He writes that the notion that Nixon-era Republicans defended law over politics is largely a myth. Republicans did initially defend Nixon at all costs, he argues. They even slammed the investigation as a, quote, witch hunt or hysteria. And Vice President Gerald Ford described the whole investigation as nothing but a cloud of doubt.
A cloud of doubt hangs over Washington as we are gathered here this evening. It is a cloud that must be cleared away for the sake of our country.
The tone may be different, but the substance is similar. Cleared away is him calling for an end of the probe, something we've heard from Trump's legal team and many Republican allies in Congress.
I think the Mueller investigation has got to stop.
We should now spend our time protecting ourselves instead of sort of having this witch hunt on the president.
I've been pushing for a year to end this investigation. I thought it was basically corrupt from the very beginning.
Put up or shut up, Mueller.
It's all about timing. Conway arguing that what you just heard largely does match what many Nixon-era Republicans initially did in reacting to the probe, and they only started to break with Nixon after those smoking gun tapes came out. That would be far later than the moment we're in right now. But it was a moment when one Republican congressman described inferences becoming fact.
Up until yesterday, I was ready to be one of the ones who felt that he was the victim of a well-orchestrated vendetta. But yesterday, the inferences turned into fact.
We don't know whether the evidence in this case will come out the way Watergate did. Conway was there, though, and he's arguing that history shows when it comes to these kind of high-drama political probes, party does matter a lot. And law is not always the first thing the partisans are thinking of. So to get into it, I am joined now by Michael Conway, as well as former Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Michael, you wrote this to correct a myth. Why are you saying this, and why now, and what do you hope to come out of it?
Well, I think to correct the record a little bit, obviously at the end of the day, there were Republicans after the smoking gun tape came out who agreed at least to the one article of impeachment about obstruction of justice. But up to then, really for 2 years, from the Watergate burglary until August of 1974, the partisans rallied around the president. Gerald Ford said this was a witch hunt, a word we've heard repeated many times now. Bob Dole then in the Senate said that this was a effort by the Democrats and the Washington Post to essentially go after the president. Even up until the time that the articles were voted, and yes, Republicans did vote for the two main articles of impeachment, but a majority of Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee voted against it. As a matter of fact, Trent Lott, who was then a congressman on the committee, said just the days before the articles were voted that he saw no direct evidence that President Nixon interfered with the FBI investigation.
You just said the E-word, evidence. It seems to me part of what you're saying for all the cocktail party chatter about how this is going to go down is when people look back at that era and say, oh, there were different or better Republicans back then, you're arguing that's not the case. It was more when the evidence moved them what happened. And let's show, of course, the famous Howard Baker moment, which you add some context to. Take a look.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
What did the president know, and when did he first know it?
You argue that while that sounds tough in hindsight, it was actually meant to protect Nixon in the, quote, mistaken belief the president didn't know about the Watergate cover-up. So it was a kind of a Devin Nunes-style move. And then you also write that once those hearings started, Baker's staff was leaking information about the committee's witnesses and plans to Mr. Nixon. What are you getting at there?
Well, absolutely. That at the time of this is the Senate committee the year before the impeachment inquiry, and Senator Baker was the lead Republican on that committee in the minority of the committee. He was, in fact, cooperating. That we have a memo that John Dean wrote at the time telling the president that Senator Baker wanted to meet with him, but wanted to keep it private so he could keep his purity on the committee. And when he postulated that question of when did he know it, the idea was he thought the president didn't know it until much later, and that it was his subordinates acting on their own that did the cover-up. Now, when the facts showed that he did know earlier, then Senator Baker became a critic. And the evidence point you make, Ari, is very important. There were members of the committee, Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee, who felt the evidence was sufficient.
Right.
A minority of them, 7 in one case, to vote for it.
And they
but
were
the
moved.
majority did not.
And that brings us to Congresswoman Edwards, who's been in that body. Your view of this theory?
Well, I mean, I think that, in Washington sometimes we're always romanticizing the past where there was some bipartisan cooperation. And it turns out, and Michael has done a great job of putting this together in historical context. Look, I remember as a gawky, geeky 16-year-old watching the gavel coverage of the Watergate hearings, and that there were no profiles encouraged. I recall I'm from Maryland, and so Larry Hogan Sr., who was on the committee, was the only Republican to vote for all 3 articles of impeachment. And so if we're waiting for the profiles encouraged to emerge among Republicans, we'll be waiting for a long time, right up until the time when the impeachment articles are being delivered.
Well, I wondered, Congresswoman, then, to extend Mike's point, what it means about our proclivity, which has probably only gotten worse as a society, to want to say we know things and we can predict things and people look at polling, when in fact, maybe what is so important here is that we don't actually know, A, what evidence will come out, and B, how people will react. But it would only help Trump if cynicism took root so deeply to assume that the Congress couldn't be moved by anything if the facts ultimately show something that merits action.
Well, I think people did think the same thing in Watergate. What is it that's going to make the Congress move? And that's why I've said all along how important it is for us to both preserve the integrity of the Mueller investigation, but really, even as Democrats, to await the results so that we can then all be responding at the same time to the same set of facts.
Congresswoman Edwards, with your expertise in knowing that body, it's very interesting. And Michael, knowing some of the history and being there, front row seat. Thank you both for being on tonight. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.